Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us today on our webinar, IEEPA Tariff Refunds, What Phase 1 Means for Importers and How to Prepare Without Triggering Risk. Please note that questions can be submitted in the questions window on your screen and will be answered toward the end of our discussion. We will do our best to answer as many questions as possible today, but if time runs out, we will personally be following up to make sure you receive the answers that you need. A recording of the session will be sent to all registrants. So without further ado, let's meet your speakers. Today we have with us Michael Violano, partner at Grassi, and Nunzio DeFilippis, co-CEO of CargoTrans. I'll pass the mic over to Mike to kick us off. So Mike, please take it away.
Great. Thank you, Lauren. And good morning, everyone. And thank you for joining us today. As Lauren mentioned, my name is Michael Violano. I'm a partner in the manufacturing and distribution practice here at Grassi, one of our largest practices here at the firm. Again, we really appreciate you all taking the time to be with us for what we know is both a timely and an important conversation. As most of you are experiencing firsthand, the IEEPA tariff refund process is moving quickly. Guidance continues to evolve, and importers are facing real questions around eligibility, timing, compliance, and risk. I know we've been tracking these developments closely through a series of updates, and today's session is meant to help what all that means in practice. To help translate all that, I'm joined today with Nunzio DeFilippis, one of the co-CEOs of CargoTrans, a class licensed customs broker. Nunzio works with importers every day on tariff mitigation, compliance, and now the execution of refund claims through the CBP's new CAPE system. A format of today is going to be short, focused, and a meaningful discussion between Nunzio and I. I will be asking Nunzio a series of questions, adding some perspective along the way of what we're seeing with all of our importers and manufacturers and distributors and all of those that have impacted with my experience and both my partners' experiences as well. And we aim to leave you with a clear takeaway on what you should be thinking about both now over the next 30 days and how to prepare going forward to make sure you can take advantage of everything that's transpired. So with that said, thank you for joining us today. I'm going to turn it over to you briefly to properly introduce yourself and maybe give a quick introduction to CargoTrans. And then you and I can jump into a spirited discussion.
Awesome. And good morning, everyone. Thank you, Mike. Thank you, Lauren and Grassi for putting this together. Again, Nunzio DeFilippis, the co-CEO of CargoTrans. I'm a licensed customs broker. For those of you who don't know us, we work with importers on trade advisory, tariff mitigation strategies, alongside our core service offerings, which is your transactional day-to-day customs clearance, international freight forwarding, import, export, all modes of transport. And we have about 2 million square feet throughout the US where we're doing fulfillment pick pack. As you can probably see, I don't know if you can see my t-shirt, it says tarified a bunch of times, right? Which I figured was probably pretty fitting for this conversation. Over the past year, right? A lot of people in the space, probably a lot of you on this webinar have felt that way, right? Kind of terrified by the tariffs and all the uncertainty. So my goal here today is simple, right? By the end of the webinar, hopefully we can make you a little less terrified and get you some of that tariff money back, the illegal tariff money. So excited to start the conversation.
That's great. That's great. Thanks, Nunzio. So I look forward to it. Let's maybe jump in at a high level. So I know we've seen with a lot of our customers a lot of activity over the last several weeks. A lot of people are talking, trying to figure it all out. Court decisions, CBP filings. The CAPE system is now going live. I guess from your perspective and your experience, I guess what's changed for importers and, why does this moment matter for them, so much here being on, April 29th?
So what's changed? I will say what's trying to change is about $170 billion is trying to kind of change, right? That's how much the government has to give back. And that's how much was illegally collected during IEEPA. And I'd say that this moment right now that we're living is significant because it's the largest tariff refund in U.S. history. And so, Mike, when me and you were speaking earlier this week, I said, as licensed customs brokers, I feel like we're in this tariff refund season, right? Which is very similar to what CPAs just came out of in your tax season. And so that's what we're in. We're in here helping importers go through this season, get some refunds back. Right now, right, we're talking about the IEEPA, but I wouldn't be surprised if we start talking about Section 122, which that's the kind of that bridge, tariff or authority that the administration used after IEEPA got struck down. We'll talk about that maybe at a future webinar, but I think that this kind of refund process may not be a one and done because, I don't think that the 122 is actually going to hold up legally, but we'll see where that goes.
Yeah, I think that's been a big spirited debate amongst a lot of the talking heads, and certainly amongst a lot of ours as well. One of the questions I hear a lot is, which tariffs qualify for refunds? Who's actually eligible to file for refunds? I think it'd be helpful. There's a lot of people on this call, a lot of local businesses, entrepreneurial businesses with resources of all different sizes. Maybe you can walk us through what they should be looking at or what that process looks like as far as, who qualifies and what's actually eligible to qualify.
Yeah, sure. So really quick. So if you go back to a year ago, April 2025, when President Trump, he stood at the Great Lawn at the White House, and he had what I call the Family Feud board, right? And it was like ding, and he had like all the countries light up, all the different. So all those, reciprocal tariffs were under IEEPA, so all those qualify. In addition, you had the China fentanyl IEEPA that qualifies. You have your Canada, Mexico IEEPA, and then anything that was kind of classified under there, like your Russian oil, India was charged with a separate IEEPA. That is all refundable. What's not is your Section 232s, those are, national security ones like your steel, aluminum, copper. Your Section 301s from Trump's first term, that's not part of this. Your 122, not part of it yet. And also de minimis, so anything that was under $800, not part of this. In terms of who can get it back, you had to be the importer of record. So you had to actually be listed on the entry summary as the importer. Typically for this call, it's probably US-based businesses and US buyers. But it's important to note that even foreign importer of record, so there are companies that might be multinational, you have maybe your parent company overseas, and sometimes, depending on the terms of sale, that foreign entity actually is the importer of record because the US allows us to do that. Also, through this year, many importers may have decided to switch their terms to delivered duty paid to DDP, making, again, the shipper kind of the importer of record. So in those cases, they can claim that back too as a foreign importer of record. There's some nuances which we can, always help in terms of you have to name a U.S. agent, but they can get the IEEPA money back. And then lastly, couriers, right? So, I'm known as kind of like the tariff guy, and probably because I wear these silly shirts everywhere. And a friend of mine, we were out to dinner. He said, "Hey, Nuns, I went to Italy over the summer. I splurged a little bit, bought some, nice suits, and then they had a tailor made, and then they shipped it to me via FedEx. A couple of weeks later after I got home, I got it back." He said, "But I ended up paying like $4,000 in tariffs. And I see all this news that you're talking about, money. Do I get that back?" So the short answer is kind of like a yes and no. All right. In those instances, when you have couriers, many times the courier acts like the importer of record. And so in that case, FedEx or UPS or DHL, they're the ones that are going to be getting the claim back. So you're going to have to kind of work with them to see what they're going to do with those funds. FedEx has come out to say they're going to work on getting the monies back. But that's sort of, something to kind of note because there are many importers who might be purchasing and shipping in that way that you can kind of see, you don't want to miss that opportunity. And then, in terms of consumers, that's where the lawsuits are really coming into play, right? The example is there's this brand called Fabletics, right? You get a subscription, you get your gym clothes kind of, mailed to your house. And during all of this, they actually said, we got to charge our customers more due to tariffs. So now a bunch of customers said, "Hey, remember when you charged me more? I want my tariff money back if you're getting it back." But that's a little bit more down the legal route. So typically you need to be the importer of record. That's the ones who are, going to be able to file and get some of these refunds back.
Right. Yeah, I think that litigation part by the customers has definitely been a talking point and something that everyone's speculating on, but, really not too much out there on it. But, I think out of everything you said there, I think the importer of record point really is the key takeaway from kind of your last answer, right? And I know us from an advisory perspective as your Grassi advisors, we're encouraging all of our clients just to do exactly that. Start from square one and just figure out, are you really the importer of record? Do you have the definition of importer of record? figure out what those costs are, and then, figure out, is this really eligible for a refund? That's how we've been advising. But just to back up for a second too, as accountants, we always seem to talk in acronyms. We mentioned something called the CAPE system. Maybe you can explain a little bit about what the CAPE system is and why CBP, which is another acronym, CBP is using it, and why it is the only way for businesses to submit claims once they figure out they actually have a claim to submit.
Yes, yeah. We have our acronyms too. It's a whole nother language, logistics language as well. And we love adding new ones. So CAPE is the Consolidated Administration and Processing of Entries, which basically, and CAPE, by the way, lives in ACE. And ACE is the Automated Commercial Environment, right? And so actually, Michael, I'll ask you a question. You can totally just guess at this. Do you know how long it took for Customs to launch ACE?
I do not.
Okay. Well, I'll tell you that they started planning it and developing it in 1994. Then the rollout happened in the early 2000s, and then it was fully operational in 2018. And so we're talking about over 25 years from planning to operational, right? And now comes this consolidated system, this CAPE, launched in 45 days, miraculously, right? And so I share this because I think it's an important point. I think, and I don't have any inside information, but this is just my gut, that this is a system that Customs has been developing for a lot longer than 45 days. And I believe the system was made to ingest a bunch of data, all this consolidated entries, right, for the purposes of auditing and processing a lot of data that their current system really wasn't able to do because the functionality was more entry by entry, right? So, I think what happened is Supreme Court struck down IEEPA and Customs was like, let's test this baby out. And we have this system, let's put it to use. And so when Customs kind of first started launching this, they held a webinar and we really made it sound like super easy, right? They said, just drop a CSV in the CAPE system with all your entry numbers and we'll take care of the rest, right? And that was it. It was very fast. And so many importers then say like, could it be that easy? So I pay attention to the rest, right? And in my opinion, I think when they say that, they're really talking about like auditing, right? And in fact, in the FAQ, in the frequently asked questions on the Customs website, it specifically kind of points out that CBP is going to review, right, all of these entries that are being put into place. And so just because you drop a CSV into CAPE and you get an error-free file, it's not that hard to do to get the error-free, to say, oh, we got it, we got all the entries numbers, you're good. What happens after that, it's important to note, Customs is now pushing those entries into what we call liquidation, which basically means audit, right? And so it is important to before you do that, to consider, are there any compliance gaps? And moreover, like, do you want to make any changes to those entries? Because before an entry liquidates, you could actually file another PSC, a post-summary correction. So once you file the CSV, it's getting pushed into liquidation and it's getting closed. So that means you cannot do any more PSCs after that. So again, like we're in this mode of, I like to say, hurry up and slow down. Like, yes, you want to kind of get going, but you want to have sort of a strategy and understand like what is happening after you upload that CSV file into CAPE, right? And so lastly, I'll say, when you're doing that, when you're submitting it into ACE, there's like a little checker, kind of like your terms and conditions, like a little check. And again, I think some importers are moving really fast. In that check, what you're attesting to, you're basically saying, me, importer, I attest that the classification, the country of origin, the valuation, everything is buttoned up and compliant, right? So remember, you're asking the government for money back. And we're talking about 170 billion. So there should be, our kind of suggestion is kind of do the audit, take your time, make sure you're cleaning the data and you understand, what you're requesting and what you're dumping into this system.
Yeah, no, that's definitely on point. And I know, we work closely with, your company as well. And look, we tell our customers the same thing, right? It's more than just putting that file in. It's also making sure you have the accounting records, the support, treat it as if someone's going to come back and question every cell or every digit that's in there, and make sure you have the records, make sure you have the inventory. The preparation really matters in this instance. So, I think what you're saying definitely makes sense. And it is more of a thoughtful process than just uploading a file and saying, I'm good. Where's my check? Because I think it's going to be a little more involved than that. And that's certainly the way that we're advising, our customers as well. So definitely point well noted. What are you seeing, I guess, causing, or are you seeing, I guess, any CAPE submissions that are being rejected or delayed, or, when they go to upload that CSV file or kind of take that initial step, as you're helping your many customers go through this process, what are you finding the submissions are getting either rejected or delayed on, or some of those pitfalls?
Yeah. So number one, right, that started happening right away is that importers of record, they couldn't access ACE, right, because they're getting locked out, right? And that might be because they never cared to access ACE prior to all this money being, kind of left on the table to get back to them. So now you're trying to kind of do some troubleshooting to get in. So there's a couple things. Like, one, it's a government system, right, a government portal. So it's not as easy as just clicking forgot password. You have to kind of call the help desk. Obviously, our kind of inside tip here, since they actually have opened up, they're open 24/7 almost, except for Sunday between 12 a.m., midnight up to 5 a.m. So I suggest doing it after hours. That's been where we've seen a lot more success on getting in and just simply getting your credentials. The other to update as well is oftentimes in the customs records, they have the incorrect email address, meaning maybe an employee left, they're not with the company anymore, whoever accessed it first, someone logged in years ago and, never updated the credentials. So a customs broker can file what's called a 5106, right? And that just updates their record. That's an easy fix so that you can kind of make sure that when customs does do the reset, it's getting pushed, correctly. Then the first thing you do as soon as you sign in, go immediately to enter in your bank information in the AC section. This is different from paying tariffs and duties, right? Because many importers are like, we pay ACH, we're good. No, is a different place in ACE where you have to put in this bank information to actually receive, funds. So it's important to note that it's different. And I'd say in terms of the CAPE filing, the most frequent rejections that we're seeing is when importers of record are currently filing types of entries that are not accepted in this phase one, right? So in phase one, it's basically liquidated entries that are 80 days past liquidation. So they will accept if you're 80 days past, and they'll allow you to reliquidate that, or any unliquidated IEEPA entries. But entries that are like warehouse entries, reconciliation, if you have anti-dumping, there's kind of your more complicated entries are not included in this phase. They said they're going to get to that in a phase two. They haven't announced when phase two is going to go live. And yesterday, the CIT and kind of customs issued an update that had some pretty good stats. So on day one, which was last week on the 20th when it went live, ACE login spiked by 70%. So I guess no one ever cared to log in before, but they had this massive, right, kind of day one, everyone kind of getting in. And up to yesterday when customs releases this data, there was about 75,000 declarations that were submitted. Out of those 75,000, 47,000 passed validation. So that's about a 63% rate. So, probably not that great. If we're going back to high school grading, it's kind of like a D, but that's where it's at. The ones that were, they included in those CAPE, validations, there was 11.2 million entries that were accepted. And then they started removing the IEEPA. But out of that, about 2.1 million were still kind of in this rejected layer. So the good news is the real something to be excited about is there's already 1.74 million entries that have been liquidated and approved for a refund process. And we've seen this for a bunch of our customers. We get the notices when entries get reliquidated, And we've seen like that they've actually approved where monies are already starting to funnel, will come back. They haven't been issued. It's probably going to be like another 60 to 90 days, but it's a lot of progress. So that's what's exciting to see, is that you have the CIT here that's really kind of adding pressure to customs, making sure that they're giving us progress reports, that money is starting to flow. So that's, again, positive, but I also think customs is posturing a bit too, because they want to appease the CIT by saying, you see, we're starting to send some money back, but then look at all these, that 45% failure. These are problems. It's going to take us a while to get through those. So they're doing an audit, but they're also starting to kind of approve some strategically as well.
Oh, that's good. Yeah, I mean, the ACH issue has definitely come up with our clients that, it was a bit of a surprise that they needed to do that in a separate module. And you also said something else that we've heard a lot of, is that the person on record is either no longer with the company, it's a bad email address, they're trying to log back in, the password's going somewhere where they can't. And that just created a lot of angst, a few weeks or months ago, once the articles came out saying that people should start to register on the system. So I know that created a bit of a headache for a lot of our customers as they were trying to navigate that. You mentioned, I guess, refunds are starting to be issued, or, I think the CBP came out and indicated that within 60 to 90 days or so, refunds after acceptance would be issued. Is that actually happening in practice, or is that something that is really holding true? What are you seeing out there as you're working with so many companies?
Yeah, so it is happening, but before like the 60 to 90 day clock ticks, I go back to kind of this liquidation that's happening. So like they've said, customs, once you put in your CSV file with all your entries and we give you a thumbs up that it's error free, the next step is we're going to push into liquidation. We're forcing that. So then you have to go back to, what does customs typically do during liquidation? They audit, they review evaluation, they review origin, they review classification. So that is kind of unknown, like how long and how much they're going to review in that process. But that's going to kind of drag the days a little bit, might be more than 90 days, because they're rightfully kind of saying, I need to do my job. Customs is saying, I need to be able to audit, right? So that's the pushback they're going to give to the CIT, is they're like, give us the time to do our proper audit. Some, they've, as released yesterday, they've done it, and they've kind of pushed through, said, good, we agree with this, these are good. And so from that point is where I would say the clock starts ticking a little bit more to now. Once you get that liquidation notice or a reliquidation notice, from that date, I would say 60 to 90 days from then is when you should start seeing, some funds directly into your account. Again, like I applaud that there is like Judge Eaton from the CIT kind of really kind of being the watchdog here and making sure that customs is doing what they've committed to do. So that's the positive.
Oh, that's good. I know we're coming up on time here, and it looks like we're getting a lot of questions. I'm going to ask you one more question, and while you're answering it, I think I'm going to run through and try to summarize all the questions that have come in. But I guess, what should importers be prioritizing over the next 30 days? I guess if you had to really break it down for them, what's something that they should say, all right, I need to start here and I need to move forward here?
Yeah. So I'll say this: you're asking the government for money back, right? So don't be sloppy about it, right? Be strategic, right? Just because it's called CAPE doesn't mean you need to consolidate everything in one shot, right? So you have to also consider, right, importers of records are also getting 6% interest back in all this, which is a pretty good amount of monies that are unaccounted for, that they probably didn't even, account, that's coming back into this. My suggestion, take that 6% and consider investing it into a proper audit, right? So that you can kind of strategically say, okay, in my first submission, here's my cleanest files. Here's the ones where I feel confident there's no gap. Customs is gonna look at this, liquidate fast, and get those funds in the door. Go after the low-hanging fruit. Then you have your ones that are, maybe there's some gaps, right? And like, that's what we do support. There's plenty of great trade advisors and customs brokers out there that can help you find these gaps and where there might be compliance issues, remedy those, get those fixed. And then you have a second. So you're kind of sequencing, and you just keep going, and you're kind of repeating that until you get, as close to 100% back as possible.
No, I think that that's good. Just to summarize a few of the questions in kind of one broad question here. After I make a submission into the system, do I have the ability to make multiple submissions? And I think you may have just answered that one, and a few people had that question. I guess it sounds like that they do have the ability to go back in and ultimately submit additional claims, correct?
Yes, and that's exactly the strategy that we're proposing to do. Do the easy ones, and then remedy the ones. And you don't have to, if there's something that you just kind of like, you feel like there's too big of a compliance gap, you need more time. There's nothing that says you have to go after it. In fact, Trump says that he'll remember the ones that don't go after it. But I think that was for more like the Walmarts and the Targets of the world.
Right. And just in that same vein, some other questions, what's the timing for that meeting? I think some people are asking, if I make that one submission today, do I have a 30-day window to make the rest of them? Is it a 100-day window? When does this expire?
Great question. So this is not like PPP where there's a fund, and then if you don't get it in by a certain time, the only kind of expiration or like that's helping to kind of prioritize how you do this is really your liquidation dates. So you should pay attention to which entries have been liquidated and make sure you don't pass that 80-day window, because you really want to get those into. So that's how you prioritize, is run a report, and we can also show where this report is. You run your liquidation dates, and then you start with the entries that have been liquidated and don't pass that 80-day window. Other than that, at this point, there's no announcement that, the CAPE system is going to expire if you don't get it in by end of year or anything like that. There is no other. The only pressure is your date of liquidation.
Okay. And it looks like two people had a similar question here, where it basically says, we're basically an owner-managed smaller business. We import, we pay tariffs, we have limited resources in-house. Our broker hasn't been very helpful. What should we do? Do we try to work with that broker? What do we do when we have limited resources and limited expertise in-house? I think is essentially what these questions are asking. How do we essentially get the help that we need, and what should we be doing for that?
Sure. So we support importers of all sizes. If it's smaller, it's a quicker audit, right? So, we have I believe, like reasonable investment to make in order to get, again, our goal is to get you all your IEEPA back and work within the interests, right? Is there maybe a little bit more for like a minimum, maximums, but we can always talk offline and, find you a way to support or just point you in the right direction on how to self-file as well. Happy to do that.
And as we're coming up on time here, and I know there's a lot of people on this webinar, and there's a lot of questions in the chat, and Nunzio and I'll get back to you. I just want to be respectful of everyone's time as we're coming up here on time. But I think, Nunzio, this has been incredibly helpful. I don't know if you want to leave any last words, 30, 60 seconds maybe, for everybody on the call, any final thoughts that you may have, and then anyone that did drop a question, and there's a lot of questions here, we'll certainly follow back up with everybody. Yeah,
final thoughts. This is a real opportunity, but it's not free money, right? So it comes with scrutiny. And again, I'll say again, hurry up and slow down, right? Move with urgency, but you need to make sure that every step can stand up to an audit. So, and thank you, Michael. Thank you for putting this together.
No, absolutely. Look, I think your insights today were great. I think your perspective is fantastic. I know you've helped a lot of mutual companies and customers and clients and businesses in the marketplace on being able to navigate this. And I think that that's a great service that you and CargoTrans, offer. I want to thank everyone else that joined us today. We discussed a lot the IEEPA tariff refund process. It's a meaningful opportunity for many importers, but it's not something we should be approaching lightly. I think we need to understand the eligibility, the timing, and the documentation requirements, as well as, what are you going to do with the monies once they come back, and what's the accounting perspective, which, your Grassi advisor can help you with those considerations as well. And I think you need to make sure that, you've kind of considered all aspects of this. So again, Nunzio, thank you to you and your team at CargoTrans. I think you've been a great resource to the marketplace, and we thank you and everybody else for joining on this call today. And again, apologies that we couldn't get to everyone's questions, but as long as we have your contact information, we will get back to you with a response.
Thank you so much.
Great. Thank you, everyone.
Amazing. Great job.
Some like humor into what can be a very dry topic. So
I love your shirt. I did not see that before we started.
Yeah,
I didn't want to put you on the spot.
I unfortunately got a bunch of them this past year. I have like a whole collection of these different tariff themed T-shirts.
I didn't want to put you on the spot, but one of the questions here was someone, we import, and Lauren, we're definitely off, right?
Yes, we are.